Hey, this is Cindy from Buried Threads. Just a word before we start today. Our episode goes to some difficult places: the death of a 16-month-old child, the loss of a child at birth, and what that kind of grief can do to a person who never gets the chance to heal from it. We believe this part of Estrella's story matters. We also believe you should know it's coming. Take care of yourself. We handle these topics with care, but we want you to be prepared. It's okay to come back to this one later.
My name is Angie, and this is the story I wasn't supposed to find.
And I'm her sister, Cindy. We started this podcast with one name, Stella Smith, our great-grandmother, a woman who gave up 2 daughters, disappeared from history, and left behind almost nothing.
No photos, no grave, no explanation, just a blank space where a person should have been.
Until a DNA test changed everything. Turns out, Stella Smith wasn't even her real name.
Her name was Estrella Suarez. She came to America from Spain as a child. She married twice, left 2 families, and somehow managed to vanish not once, but twice from history.
In season 1, we found Estrella's beginnings in America. We found family we didn't know existed. We sat across a table from cousins who'd been looking for the same woman we had from the other direction. And we thought we were closing a chapter.
We were wrong.
Because season 2 is where things get even more complicated and even more personal. New relatives surface, new documents turn up, and some of the answers we finally found led to questions we'd never thought to ask.
This is Buried Threads, a podcast about family secrets, silence, reinvention, and what happens when the past refuses to stay buried.
Before she was our great-grandmother, Stella DeBoard, even before she was married to Emilio Valdez, she was Estrella. We really don't know much about her life. Before coming to the U.S., we believe she came around 1913 when she was about 8 years old.
Her family is from the Asturias, Spain region, and in the U.S., she lived with her uncle Manuel, his second wife Rosa, and his daughter Luisa by his first wife, Concepcion, who passed away. We believe that Estrella was brought to help Manuel with Luisa, and so she had a helper role in the family, which becomes important later. Estrella went to school, and she also likely helped Rosa with the household and children as she was the oldest. They lived in St. Louis and then moved to Taylor Springs, Illinois, where Rosa and Manuel began their married life. We knew about their children together, Joe Pasita, who's also known as Nina, and Anna. At one point, we thought there was another Luisa, but that was not correct. It was a mistake on the census.
We recommend listening to season 1 and even the other episodes in season 2 to get caught up on all the details of Estrella's life and timeline, because there is a lot that we are not going to cover in this episode.
We always believed that a woman leaving her family and her young children behind twice is not normal. You've heard us say that several times throughout there. Not trying to make excuses or glamorize the story. It's just not a normal thing. And so we've always believed that there had to be something that happened which shaped Estrella and her ultimately shaped the choices that she made. And recently, we learned some information about life in Taylor Springs, which may give us some context that we've been looking for as far as what shaped a woman who would choose to walk away from her children. And we're going to share that today.
Right. So in going back over the documents and the sites and the things that we've gathered, one of the things I think that you found early on, and we just maybe hadn't revisited, is that Manuel and Rosa, we had believed that their firstborn child together was Jose, or they call him Joe. But we now know that actually they had another child before him, and her name was Berendina Suarez, of course. She was born March 13th. Of 1916, and she died August 7th of 1917. We have her death certificate. When it talks about the location of her burial, it says Catholic Hillsborough, but there is no such place. I can't find it in the history records, and I can't find it now. So I wonder if it's just a Catholic cemetery near Hillsborough, and that's just kind of the shorthand of it. I'm not sure. There is a church with a cemetery, I think, called St. Agnes, but that would be interesting to find where her actual grave site would be. But as of late March of 2026, Paul and his family didn't really know about Berendina. Or if they had ever known about her, they weren't aware of her. Obviously, somebody knew about her.
I think it wasn't talked about, you know. It's obviously a sad thing, and And because she was the oldest, they wouldn't have had memory of her necessarily. And so, yeah, I think that it just wasn't talked about.
Yeah. And then when it's not talked about, later generations may not know because they may not have ever actually heard about her. So a couple things that her death certificate tells us. Well, first of all, having a death certificate for an infant is not unusual or really particularly surprising, other than it was just something we didn't already know. But took a closer look at her death certificate and found there is a little more to the story. Her age when she passed was around 16 months old, and the cause of death is listed as cerebral edema with it says a contributing factor or contributory factor is dementia. And on the death certificate it says like the time, I can't remember how it words it right now, I don't have it in front of me, but basically the time of endurance, the time frame of the illness or whatever is it appears to be 5 days. So that's a pretty fast
Yeah.
deterioration.
The word dementia kind of threw us off. I didn't know that mean this was a child that was born with some challenges, or I just didn't really know what that meant. I was confused by it. And so we did some research into it, and it said that likely the dementia refers to some sort of deterioration of awareness, of speech, of recognition of others, clearly regarding brain function. And the cerebral edema is dangerous swelling of the brain. Likely causes, there could have been like a traumatic injury of some sort, but also probably more likely could also be an infection. There were a lot of things that were kind of happening at that time and that there weren't a lot of treatments for, things like a bacterial meningitis, not the only possibility, but very likely for the way it's described and for what's happening in our country in this area at that time. Child deaths from bacterial meningitis were spiking during this time. Other diseases were also causing a high number of child deaths like typhoid or scarlet fever, diphtheria, measles complications, those kinds of things.
Yeah, I was just going to add, when I was looking at this, she passed in 1917, and that is so close to when the pandemic really hit the U.S. in 1918. And we also know they lived in Spanish communities, and there were a lot of immigrants from Spain. So I did explore this a little bit to say, could this have been an early showing of Spanish flu? Or I don't remember what the official name of it is, but that's a common name.
Yeah.
But when I was researching that, it really doesn't seem like these symptoms would fit that specifically unless there was something else on top of it. I just want to acknowledge that historical context. It doesn't, and the other things that you mentioned too, these wouldn't be, cerebral edema wouldn't be a normal symptom of those other, that's why meningitis seems like the most practical one, likely one.
So some of the symptoms of a bacterial meningitis would include a severe headache, dizziness, nausea, vomiting, weakness, lack of coordination, trouble speaking, confusion, vision changes, and then of course, loss of consciousness.
So you think about this in a 16-month-old. And during a time when there wasn't a vaccine and there wasn't really treatment available for bacterial meningitis or for cerebral edema, either one. And so I did go to our AI friend to ask, what might this have looked like over the course of 5 days? Because because her death certificate specifically mentioned that time frame. What would this have looked like? Just to sort of understand what would have went on, in the household. The only thing I have to compare it to, I had a 9-week-old who had RSV, which was terrifying. I had a 18-month-old who had other respiratory infections and had some seizures that come from a fever. So in my mind, it takes me back there. It takes me back to those scenarios. My child can't breathe, running to the emergency room, seizures, that kind of thing. So I was just wondering, in a 16-month-old, what might this have looked like? So over the course of 5 days, just cerebral edema, but what that would have looked like, because that ultimately is what she passed from. It would look like starting with a flu, high fever, probably what you would typically see in a flu with a child this age. They don't want to eat, they're irritable, maybe throwing up what they do take in. But moving into day 2, you would begin to see inflammation. And there was something that I wasn't aware of, is like the body kind of goes rigid. And there's also a sensitivity to light, which then made sense. They didn't really treat it at that time, but they tried to sort of abate the symptoms. And one of them was to put them in a dark room. I was like,
Yeah.
put them in a dark room. That's a really strange, but it was sensitivity
Yeah.
to light was one of the things. And then there was something else that was described, and I'm not an expert. This is just what I found, and it's called paradoxical irritability. And this is where, a 16-month-old, they're not feeling well. They may want to be comforted and held by a caregiver, but it's actually painful for them when they're picked up, when they're held, when they're rocked. It because of the swelling in their brain and the way their body is reacting, it actually can be more painful. So imagine being a caregiver for a child who's suffering with this. And what do you want to do? You want to hold them. You want to make them feel better. And they may even be crying out for that. But then it's not comforting. It's actually very painful, and people may not understand. But as it would progress, of course, you would expect things get worse. There's more lethargy, swelling, of course, seizures, unresponsiveness. And then just within 5 days, which is such a sad course, within 5 days, you have maybe leading up to a coma, and then just heart failure ultimately comes. And it's just such a sad diagnosis, a difficult diagnosis even today, but sad, devastating diagnosis at that time. Yeah, it's really sad.
Yeah. I mean, today, with today's things that are accessible, treated, it still has this extremely high fatality rate. With treatment, it still has a 10 to 30% fatality rate. So, I mean, it is a hard thing, and I can't imagine. So in 1917, there's no antibiotics. There's no cure. The death rate was between 60 and 90%. 1 or 2 gold standard healthcare facilities in America would have been able to treat the cerebral edema in a child, but they still would have had a very high fatality rate.
And I just can't imagine this family would have had access to those.
Yeah. It's rural Illinois, a young immigrant family that had limited means. They would have tried to keep the child comfortable in a darkened room, hydrated, and quiet. These measures were only, of course, symptomatic relief. This would have been a death sentence without antibiotics. But think about what else is happening in the home at the same time. So you have Manuel, who's working in the mine. You have Rosa, who delivered her second child 1 month before this happened.
That's Joe, right?
Yes. So she's still recovering, and there's a new baby in the house. And then you have Estrella and Luisa. Luisa's, a toddler, maybe preschooler, maybe 4. And you have Estrella, who's 10 or 11, who just being present in this environment would be traumatic. But she wasn't present only. She had responsibility for helping to care for these kids. And if Rosa's there caring for Joe, it's very likely that some of her time was spent trying to provide this relief to this child. I can't imagine that being anything but extraordinarily traumatic.
Yeah. And we went to Taylor Springs. This is a mining community. These are not sprawling homes. So everybody in the household would have been impacted by this. You would have heard it. You would have seen it. You would have known about it. So everybody would have been fully aware. But you're right. Estrella, most likely, and we've talked about this before. The oldest child always ends up helping. My oldest child helped with my younger children. So, at 10 or 11 is old enough to help, and certainly with the baby or with Barandina who's sick or just other household things, it would have been a high stress time in that house. It would have been very difficult, I think.
So once we learned about Barandina and started thinking about how that might have impacted Stella, we took another look at the stillbirth certificate for Joe, the twin of Mary Rose. So just as a reminder, when Estrella was 15, she got married. When she was 16, she had twins. One of them, the firstborn, was Joe, and he did not survive. Again, the certificate said stillbirth, and we just said, okay, stillbirth. And then she had Mary Rose. We thought it was going to be straightforward, although still just an awful situation. But we were wrong. Joe was not just a stillborn.
Let me just lay out the facts that we know, and then we'll talk about what we think.
Yeah.
So like you said, she was 16. According to Joe's death certificate, there was a doctor from Hillsborough present at least to sign the death certificate. We also know that Estrella went into labor at 8 months, which I kind of feel like is pretty good for being pregnant with twins, especially so young, right?
Yeah.
Like I felt like that was a good term. Joe was delivered first. We also know the cause of death listed for Joe is, okay, it's listed as this. It says breech. And then next to it, it says asphyxia, just like that. That's all it says. But that actually tells us a lot. Again, not a medical professional, but I know how to look stuff up, right? On lots of websites and check lots of, different sites, sources.
And we've had babies.
And we've had babies and we've had friends who have had babies, and we understand what happens and some of the risks. Being moms, we understand the risk, at least the major risk of a child who's born breech. They go to great lengths to try to reposition a baby who's breech, or now they're just more likely to just say, we're doing a C-section, right? Just very quickly because this child is breech. And that's because there are major risks. A child who is breech is just in the wrong position for delivery. And it's dangerous because they're at risk for a prolapsed umbilical cord. And what that means is the umbilical cord enters the birth canal before the baby does. And this is actually the most dangerous complication of a breech birth, because once that happens, if the cord goes into the birth canal before the baby, then the baby's weight going, following that, then compresses it during delivery, and it cuts off the baby's oxygen for as long as it takes to be delivered. And delivery can take, it's called delivery in labor for a reason. It takes time. So once that happens, the baby's oxygen can be cut off, and then there's it's an emergency situation. So, based on the breech and asphyxia, that's almost certainly what happened in this delivery. And she would have had very little time to deliver before the baby asphyxiated or suffocates. And I have no idea. I know that they knew about these things in this time frame, but I don't know what equipment they had to detect it early. Now we would detect it maybe even before a mom went into labor. If she has regular medical care, they would do an ultrasound and they would say, oh, the baby's not in the right position. We might need to make a different plan. I also read in a few places that the longer a mother carrying multiple babies, the longer she goes to term, the more risk there is of this, because there's less room in there.
Yeah.
Right. The babies are bigger and there's less room. So while I'm like, 8 months, that's a good long time for babies, for twins, it may actually be a contributing factor, especially if they didn't have the instruments to detect what was going on in advance and then to do something about it.
Right. Well, and then you think about this. Chances are great she did not even know she had twins before she went into labor. They didn't have ultrasounds.
Or certainly she wouldn't have had access to them.
Right.
I don't know when ultrasounds became a thing or that sort of detection, but certainly she would not have access to that kind of medical care.
Yeah. It's possible, but chances are not. And so I just try to imagine she's 16 years old. It's her first delivery, which is already traumatic anyways. And then the first one goes as wrong as it can go. And of course, there's going to be a room full of people, likely. Rosa would have probably been there. Her husband, well, maybe not. Maybe they're waiting out. Yeah. Midwife, whatever, all aware of like what just happened. And then it's like, oh, wait, your body's not done. There's another child.
Right.
Terrifying.
I'm pretty sure she would have had to have delivered. I think the time frame I saw is within 30 minutes she would have delivered. Yeah. Well, Maria is her birth name, but we refer to her as Mary Rose because there's a lot of Maries and Marias. So we refer to her as Mary Rose. Yeah. And also delivering a breech baby is physically, it's not the right position. So it's physically challenging. It's a difficult, painful delivery. And it is possible that the baby asphyxiated before being born or in the process. Mm-hmm. It could have happened because she was so far along. It could have happened just before delivery, or it could have happened in the process of delivery. But it would have been very difficult. And then you're right, to deliver another baby shortly after, even if she knew about it, it would be terrifying to go through that again under any circumstances. Would be exhausting and terrifying. But then after what was just experienced, it would just be really, to me, I feel like it would just be really scary. Thinking about the time period and even some of what we've learned about the family culture. I don't want to just make it cultural or make it context of the era, although we do know some of those things, what was typical of the time, but also what we have learned about the family and what we are learning. You know, it's unlikely at this time that anyone sat down with this 16-year-old new mother to talk about what she just went through physically and emotionally. I was married young and I had my first child just before I turned 20. And it was a difficult delivery because I was very sick and I won't get into it. Nobody sat down with me and talked about the emotional or physical impact specifically.
Yeah.
Motherhood, yes, there was lots of preparation and discussion and that sort of thing. Lots of books to read, what to expect when you're expecting and whatever,
Right.
but not the emotional and physical toll of being sick, being on a feeding tube, delivering a child early, difficult delivery, baby born with cord around its neck, that kind of thing. Like nobody followed up with me afterward to say, hey, do you want to have a conversation about this? Let's talk about this. This might have been really emotionally difficult for you, you know? And that was in 1999. In 1917, it's highly unlikely that anyone said, let's sit down and talk about what you just experienced. Let's talk about the physical and emotional impact it might have on you. Let's talk about the loss of your baby and the grief you might experience.
And let's talk about how you then pick up the baby that did live.
Yeah.
And not feel guilty about the bond that you make with that baby while also grieving the baby that you lost.
Yeah.
I can't imagine.
We already know, just because of the number of family members who didn't even know about this, that it's very unlikely that the family talked very much at all about the baby she lost, because the generations to follow didn't know anything about him. We didn't know. It was a person on Reddit who followed the thread and said, oh, guess what I just found? So it's just not likely. And mostly just because that's just not what was done. It was unknown. That kind of care just wasn't a part of normal medical care at that time.
Right.
We have progressed, but also, even if they had talked to her about it, she's 16. I don't know what she would have done with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We don't know what, if any, trauma that Estrella may have experienced in her early childhood years, right, before this. But we do know that kind of thing can impact relationships and attachment in the future. But the fact that she left, again, we don't know the reason why, but she left her family of birth and joined this family, in America, that has trauma on its own. Even if it's a positive move, even if all things are great, that's still a trauma.
Yes.
And those kind of traumas do impact the way that you see the world and the way that you respond to the world. And it does have specific issues related to attachment. But we are 100% sure that both the death of Berendina, witnessed by an 11-year-old girl and childcare provider, like providing that care to her, and also the death of one twin Joe in delivery by a 16-year-old mother, was traumatic. There's no debating that. There's no debating that.
Correct.
Life-changing trauma.
I don't know how she handled that trauma, but we know that it was traumatic.
Well, we don't know how she handled the trauma, but yet we do. We see breadcrumbs.
That's right.
Or maybe even neon signs throughout her later life that tell us exactly how she responded to that trauma, and it wasn't well.
It's part of what has brought our central question. The central question our grandmother had, and the central question we started with. Yes, we were searching for our missing great grandmother, but ultimately the question at the heart of it was, why did she leave? I believe that was really what our grandmother wanted to know, and and that's really what we want to know.
I think she wanted to know, why did she leave me?
Why did she leave me? Correct. Exactly. Everything about the way she carried the secret and the way she interacted with her own daughter and all of that points to that being at the heart of her heart, is wanting to know, why did she leave me? And so you're right. We see the choices that she made, and even we were like, there must be something that has happened.
Yep. We can't diagnose, but we can talk about the possibility of just a long-term emotional toll, of traumatic attachment disruption. Nervous system learns to respond in a certain way as a surviving mechanism.
Yeah.
The body might send signals to not attach, or may cause one to distance from close attachments, or specifically to young children. Think about this. I'd be terrified.
Right.
I'd be terrified of children. Right.
Right.
Or of crying babies. I would never be able to handle a cry. I mean, I can't handle crying babies anyways. Well, this would definitely push me over the edge, I think. And so, and that's what we know about trauma, is your body responds, even if your mind is trying to stay a different course. Our body responds automatically in these kind of things. This type of nervous system response would cause someone to appear cold and disinterested, or even to physically leave because of the fear, the fight or flight messages from the body. And doesn't that sound familiar with a lot of what we've heard about Estrella in her early years through research, and also what we learned from Terry about what that looked like as a grandmother?
Yeah. I think about this. I'm just trying to relate it to my experience as a mother. And I talked about my 9-week-old getting RSV, and there was a traumatic event, that caused us to find out about that. But one of the things, even after he was home and doing fine, he was in the hospital for like 2 weeks or something. And after he was out, I still was very hyper aware. I would check on him almost obsessively to make sure that he was breathing. I mean, we were doing all the things and he was better enough, but like that fear, we barely went outside. It was winter and I was like, we're not going outside. That's as close as I can come to like that hyper awareness. I'm a pretty logical person. And so my brain is telling me he's fine. He's fine. Everything's fine. You have the monitor on. But my body, I physically had the need. I could not move on to something else until I went and looked at him and made sure that he was okay. Several times. I wouldn't go to bed until I had done it several times. And I might even wake up in the middle of the night. Everything seems fine, but I'm going to go check on him just in case. It sort of feels irrational, but it's really not, based on the trauma that we experienced. It's not the same thing as what we're discussing here, but it's the closest I can come to relating to that sort of nervous system response.
Right. Well, and think about this. I think it's a great example because not a lot of us can relate to the story that we shared here, but a lot of us can relate to this story. But so you talked about how that impacted during the time he was young. Well, he's in his 20s now. Are you going to his room to check his breathing now? No, you're not, because you have moved on from that. But at the same time, do you think that experience, because he was your second child, do you think that experience had an imprint on the way that you viewed all babies, the way that you viewed the next two girls that followed when they were infants? You have I guess he's one now, but you have a relatively new grandson. Does that impact the way that you see him as a baby?
Yeah.
It becomes a fingerprint, a thumbprint.
It does.
An imprint on it.
Like that sticky note we talked about.
Yes.
For sure. And the other, I think about fight or flight. And again, I don't want to go too much into detail about my experience, other than to say there was a moment when we had to take action, and we had to get him to the hospital. And I had already kind of been traumatized by him struggling to breathe. And we lived in Chicago at the time. I hated to drive there. I mean, in the city, we lived in the city, and I hated to drive there, but that's what I had to do. And so I handed my son to my husband, and I insisted on driving, which in my mind was kind of a flight response, right? I wasn't running away from my child and from his care, but I could not hold him because I know I can identify the fear that I had in that moment. I could not watch him stop breathing again. I just couldn't. And so I would do the thing that I hated to do, which is drive in the city of Chicago when I was in that high stress moment. And my husband was like, "Are you sure? Let me drive," because that's his thing. And I'm like, no, I need to drive because I can control driving.
So you feel in control.
Right. I feel in control, but I could not bear. I was so afraid that he was going to stop breathing again. And I could not bear to hold him when that happened. So again, I know it's not the same thing, but when you think about these sort of traumas, I can relate to that sense of not everybody would respond that way, but that's how I responded in that moment. It was more of a flight response. I'm going to take care of him, but I'm not going to be the one to hold on to him and to comfort him. I can't do that. I'm going to do something else. And that, I think, is that sort of nervous system fight or flight response. I was still fighting, but I was also flighting, I don't know. It's as close as I can come to trying to understand what that feels like in the moment, that sort of response that might cause a mother to say, I'm going to do something, but I can't do what looks like the motherly nurturing thing. That wasn't my response in that moment. Does that make sense at all?
It does. But think about this. We did a little bit of a review of the timeline once we kind of had this in our mind. And so she left Mary Rose when Mary Rose was between the age of 1 and 2. We don't know exactly when, but keep in mind, how old was Bernardina when this happened? 16 months. Okay. So she left Mary Rose between the ages like 1 and 2. She also left the family she's a part of without any more contact that we can identify. And we're pretty certain about that. She left Florence. Again, we don't know exactly, but about the same time, because we think there was 2 years between Florence and Marie Christine's birth. We believe it was before Marie Christine was born. So somewhere in that same 1 to 2 year old range, she left Florence. And then she left Marie Christine early on, either possibly at birth or soon after. We don't know all the details about that. It's an interesting parallel to see that as the child's approaching or is at the same age of where the trauma was, that it sparked something in her to flight, to leave, to run. And I think that goes back to that, how trauma causes body responses that she may not have even been aware. I just find it very interesting to see that the pattern of it happening with the ages of those children.
When we see a pattern, that is something to pay attention to. When we see that kind of pattern, we're not diagnosing anybody or anything like that. We're certainly not capable of that, but we are both educated and trained and experienced enough with working with people in crisis. We both have been trained in crisis care, crisis counseling in the social services world, pastoral counseling.
Mm-hmm.
Both of us are experienced and trained in those areas. So we, have intentionally put ourselves next to people who are in crisis, and we know what that looks like. And when we see these patterns, we understand something has caused that.
Yeah.
And it's that fingerprint impact. The other thing, when you were talking about that time or that pattern, Terry also shared some things that point to this being impactful or something being impactful. Some of the observances she made about her grandmother, she said a few things. One of the things that she said was she got the sense that her grandmother didn't really like children. And that can be that distance, that fear, I have to stay away. She also said that her grandmother didn't often come to see her, that her grandfather would take a train to come see her, but her grandmother did not. She took trains to other places like Springfield, but not to see her. And she said she didn't first meet her grandmother until she was 3 or 4, which is interesting because now you're out of the toddler stage and into the preschool stage. Maybe that's the point where she felt more comfortable. We want to consider that her leaving might not have been, I don't care, might have been, I care very much. And I feel like this is the best thing I can do to care for you is to not be here with you. And I know it's not logical to those of us who aren't in that situation. But if literally everything in your body is signaling you, danger, 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 when you go near your child, and if that was compounded by early attachment issues as well, that could be a lot. And it could speak to why she made some of the choices that she did.
So one of the interesting things that Terry shared, so I find it interesting with talking to Terry because all the stuff we know about Estrella before she was Wilma, we know from documents and a little bit of family stuff, but not people who knew her directly, people who knew about her, who heard about her, and then looking at documents. But talks to Terry, she knew her in the flesh. This was her grandmother. She knew her for her whole life. Well, from the time she was 3 on, but knew her. And so I find those observances to be very interesting. But one of the things that she shared, in addition to the things that you shared, is that she told a story. Her grandmother, she was about a teenager, like 15, 16. And she went to visit her grandmother. And when she, at her apartment, whatever, and her grandmother wouldn't let her come into the apartment. So she came down to the lobby to see her. And when they're talking, she talked about all her grandmother wanted to talk about was this little child that she was babysitting. And I said, babysitting? She said, yeah, I don't really know why she was doing that. She never seemed like she liked children, but all of a sudden there's this neighbor girl or somebody that started babysitting, and all she wants to do is just talk about it and what she's doing with it. And she said, it kind of made me feel jealous. Like, why are you doing all this stuff with this child that you're babysitting when you never did any of that with me? And then she said, it kind of feels silly to say that. I said, well, it's not silly.
Oh, it's not.
Again, I don't want to be overly dramatic or romanticizing things, but to me that looks like maybe some healing later on in life, that she was able to, at that point in her life, enjoy some of the things that she missed out on because she had distanced herself at the younger age. And so that just gives me a little bit measure of comfort that even though, nobody did appear to walk alongside her and say, these are some hard things that you dealt with. And, here's how to process it. That instead, she still found some measure of something because in her later years, she was very tickled and endeared with this young child. And I just think, to me, that's just a picture of possibly healing.
Yeah. Well, and the fact that she stayed with Francis and Edward.
Exactly.
I mean, I don't know.
She crossed that threshold.
Yeah, I don't know how she endured that, how she made that through, but she did it,
Yeah.
And that says something too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I also think, we do know that she was with Etta Montgomery from 1928 to 1937, 9 years. That's the longest and most stable time probably of her life, because even when she was with the Suarezes, they moved around a lot because of the mines kept closing and they had to move to the different towns. And there was also just a lot of things happening, coming to America and then getting married, and then not her getting married, Rosa and Manuel getting married. And then there's the move from St. Louis out, and just lots of things happening. So those 8 years would have been the most stable in her life. And what follows that at the end of that in 37 is that she gets married again, and she's able to stay with that spouse all the way through raising 2 children to the end. To me, that says also healing.
Correct. Yeah. I don't think that we can overstate the importance or the relevance of the fact that she was 16 years old. I know, sometimes, it can be easy to look back on history and judge the way, things that happen. I mean, even my own kids are like, Mom, you got married, when you were just before we turned 19, just 6 months out of high school, we got married. My kids are like, that's so crazy. And none of them got married at 18. But they're just, to them, that's just unfathomable that you would get married at that age. And really, it wasn't as common with my generation as it was with our mom and dad's generation.
Yeah.
But you look back on those things and you're kind of judgy about it. We do have to remember it was a different world. And actually, I've heard lots of stories of people getting married at that age. But what we understand about brain development now and what we understand about emotional health in adolescence, we understand that regardless of whether it was normal or not, that
she wasn't ready.
Yeah, we aren't 16-year-olds. Their brains are not developed enough to be able to rightly handle, no matter how well prepared or even guided, to be able to handle a lot of those decision makings, and their brain is still putting things together, and those kinds of traumas impact that development. We just know that to be true now. It was true then just as much as it's true now, no matter how common this might have been. So I don't think that we could overstate the fact that we are talking about a 16-year-old, and that's relevant here as well as to what she would have been capable of handling. And then by the time 1937 comes around, near 30, she's her late 20s.
Yeah. No, she would have been 32. Still 32, yeah.
Oh yeah, you're right, 32. But still, much older, maybe much more capable of, working through that stuff.
So we've been chasing down different angles of her story and having a good chuckle on some of the choices that were made or what they look like. And it's a wild story in lots of ways. But at the heart of it, and I've said this from the very beginning, is why this is not normal. And for me, understanding this doesn't answer every question, doesn't fill every blank, but it gave me this sense of, okay, now I understand a little bit of how this might have come to be. And again, for me, it just gives context to the choices that were made, at least some of them, and just gives a picture of how there could be a scenario in which this might play itself out.
And I think it helps us. We've already tried to approach this discovery, this search, without judgment. We're not trying to be holier than thou and judge our ancestors' choices, because we can't fully know without speaking with them and hearing from them. But this also helps us consider with compassion the choices that she made that did cause hurt and harm to other people, that brought about pain in their lives and some things passed down, trauma even. It does help us maintain compassion for her, to say, she was carrying weight of her own. And I don't mean to be cliche, but what's the saying? Hurt people hurt people.
Yep.
And it's not intentional. Like, I don't, that was what was so strange especially about thinking about Emilio and Mary Rose and her leaving, because on paper it just looked like she just decided to walk away one day.
Mm-hmm.
And that is just so hard to reconcile. As a mom, as a wife, I know lots of scenarios where people have walked away, but just to just decide to walk away, it just seems so cold. And I don't think that that's the case. I think we're talking about someone who is carrying a lot at a young age. They were unprepared for, ill-equipped for. I don't know that I, at my age right now, would be equipped to handle it appropriately. And so I think we can look at her with empathy and compassion. And I do understand we're a little bit more privileged to be able to do that because we're generations removed.
Mm-hmm.
And we've talked about this before. Maybe Edward or our grandmother or even Mary Rose might have a harder time because they're directly impacted. And I get it, but that's just not where we are.
Yeah.
So I think we can carry her story with compassion and empathy, and also acknowledge that there are people who still are living this today, who are walking with this kind of trauma, maybe without the resources to know how to work through it, how to carry it, or how to even survive it, really. And then what ends up happening is it looks like them causing other people pain or even causing themselves pain. So I think it makes me have a lot of compassion for this, for things I don't understand about this woman's choices in our history. It just makes me have a lot of compassion for her.
Yep. And I think that compassion is never misplaced, because what cannot be debated is this was a horrific and traumatic time, not only for Estrella, by the way, but for everyone in the home, and everyone handled it in their own way. But this 11-year-old child, it made an imprint on her.
Yeah, I think it did. Yep.
So we still have lots of questions about Estrella's life, particularly between 1928 and 1937. And, spoiler, we have a lot of new information coming in right now relating to all this. And so we don't have the answers yet. Well, we have some that we're going to talk about in future. But we also we're right on the edge of a lot more of very interesting information related to these years in particular. And I think that is going to unlock a lot more of her story.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. We're still also very curious about Florence, the timeline with her. The foster care situation is sort of muddy. Her relationship, Wilma put Florence's married name in her daughter's obituary. It seems so random, but we know it's not random.
Yeah.
It's the truth peeking through. So we have lots of questions about Florence. We also have questions about Marie Christine. We're hunting some of those down, but the adoption and her history before, there are some question marks. We know some firm things like when she was adopted, but there are some question marks that could give us insight into her early childhood as well, which I think is really important.
And Stella hid little pieces of her life that she was leaving inside of the life that she built. And so it's interesting to collect those little pieces. And I think it also gives a picture.
I think if we had to choose one thing that would be symbolic of that, is her name.
Yes.
And all the versions of her name. Estrella, Stella. And I know Wilma seems like a outlier, except her middle name was Estelle.
Right.
So I think that's important.
And her husband called her Stella when they were fighting.
Yeah. I still think he knew some stuff, but that's a whole different conversation. But the other thing we still want to learn more about, two other things, I guess. One is one word, Christopher.
We've not been doing as much with him, right? But we will. It's coming.
But we just have so much coming down. Discovering Wilma and all of that.
The dam has broken with regards to Stella.
But we have not forgotten about Christopher. And then also, we believe, based on the records we do have, although we know we don't hold those too tightly, we believe that Stella was born around 1905 and that she came to the U.S. in 1913. So we would love to know more about her time at home in Spain, her nuclear family.
Yeah.
We know she was Roman Catholic, so we know she was likely baptized. I think 8. Would she have had confirmation by 8, or is that older? I can't remember.
I think that's older.
Okay, maybe that's a little older. But anyway, there would at least maybe be record of her baptism. We want to know more about her nuclear family back in Spain. So those are some of the things that are still hanging out there for us.
Yes. One of the challenges of our search is that Estrella was born over 120 years ago in another country. And many of the family members who knew her in those early years, Manuel, Rosa, Emilio, Joe, Marianne, Luisa, and Nina, they've all passed away. Well, it's helpful, very helpful, to hear stories that have been passed down to later generations. We can't actually speak with them. Or can we?
Join us next week as we hear from someone who is a part of Manuel and Rosa's household, their family, maybe the only voice left to be heard of anyone with direct knowledge of who Estrella was in her, let's say, first life.
In her own voice.
In her own voice. We will hear her voice. Yes, very exciting.
Until then, keep pulling the threads.
Thanks for listening. If you're walking your own search through DNA, silence, or a name you can't quite place, you're not alone.
If you want to go deeper on this story, you can find us on Substack at buriedthreads.substack.com. That's where we release every episode, along with documents, photos, and the kind of details that don't always make it into the audio.
You can also find and follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. And if you haven't yet, subscribing or leaving a review makes a real difference in helping other people find us.
For more photos, recap videos, polls, and the occasionally chaotic behind-the-scenes moments, find us on Facebook and Instagram. We're at Buried Threads.
And if something we've shared has stirred something in your own family story, we really do want to hear it. Reach out. You might be surprised where a single thread leads.
Until next time, keep pulling the thread.
Just knowing she existed. She was real. She had a name.